Today, we are happy to host our monthly webinar, Network Leadership Lessons from the Field. Today we have a special guest and speaker, Jenna Bannon, who is here with us to talk about building resilient community networks in challenging times. As usual, before we start, I'm just going to say a little bit about our center and why we do these webinars. I am Danielle Varda. I'm the director of the Center on Network Science at the School of Public Affairs at the University of Colorado, Denver. With me is someone that you've probably gotten emails from, Melinda Mochizuki, who is our events coordinator and responsible for always keeping us on task. So just a little bit about our center. The things that we do here are provide tools and capacity building for people in communities who are trying to build networks. And we do that in different ways. We do evaluation and research. One of the things we always want to leave people with is knowledge about some tools that we have that are available for folks. So go to our website. You can find out about the partner tool, which allows folks to do their own network analysis. It's designed for community cross-sector collaboratives to look at their progress over time and map their networks out. We're also just doing a soft launch of our person-centered network app, which is a new app that collects data on personal support networks. Around January, we'll be releasing this to the public, and it's a great way to be able to collect data, just like the picture shows right there, kind of at the personal level. A lot of users are providers who are trying to screen people in communities who they serve to identify the gaps and strengths in their personal support networks and then link them to community resources in real time. So just a little information on tools, and then just a little background on what network leadership is. We follow network leadership, which is a model to help people who are part of cross-sector community efforts learn how to build, manage, and evaluate effective networks. Just a couple more announcements. Our 6th annual Network Leadership Training Academy will be coming up May 16th to 18th here in Denver. It's 3 days of great times with about 100 people who come from across the country and even other countries to work together on really trying to do some peer learning and build skills around managing these kinds of networks. So a really unique opportunity to kind of get to focus on the things that are most challenging. And then our next webinar, we're going to do November 28th. We usually do once a year a kind of network evaluation using the partner tool demo webinar, and we're going to take November to do that one. So if you're interested in these tools and how to use them and how to apply them to evaluating networks, that's going to be the next opportunity for that. We always love it when people stay connected. So here's some ways that you can connect with us either on the website or through email. And of course, we do have our network leadership group on Facebook that is kind of one of our favorites, where we ask people to post their own tips and learnings on network leadership. Just a couple things on the webinar. If you have a question, we're going to open it to questions for Jenna after her presentation. And there's a Q&A box, and that's where we hope you'll put those questions and just kind of queue them up. If you have a technical question, like your speakers aren't working or the slides aren't showing, put that in the chat box, and that's where we'll be able to get those more quickly. And we will record the webinar and email the slide deck and any other resources that come up or that we think might be related to this after the webinar is over. This is kind of a crazy looking slide, but I thought this was interesting for today's webinar. We had about 170 people RSVP, and I was just curious of where everyone was coming from. So the point here is to show how diverse really the folks who are interested in network leadership are. These are, we get the most from Colorado because this is where we are located and it's where our own community resides. But we have a lot of folks, particularly in this call, from Canada, which I thought was really interesting. We always have Canadian partners at our events and contributing with us. So we'd love to say hello to you all. And just a lot of different states of folks that showed up. I'd love to show you what kinds of organizations people are from, but we've found that network leadership is really cross-sector. And so the people who show up for these calls come from public health and health, but also from education and We have folks always from defense. Some of the military institutions tend to show up, and all kinds of different ways that people are trying to think about this. And I think today's webinar is going to be really great because we are facing a lot of challenges in these particular times that are the kinds of things that Jenna is really facing. And so we'll have some time to think about that and how it kind of fits across our common challenges and needs. So I'm going to introduce Jenna for just a moment here. So she is from the Denver Early Childhood Council. And there's actually a typo there. She's not from the Nonprofit Centers Network, so our apology for that. She's the Director of Health and Wellbeing at Denver's Early Childhood Council and Project Director of Launch Together in Southwest Denver. Jenna has national, state, and local experience in public policy, cross-sector collaboration, and project management, and has worked on child policy issues for our former governor and with grant makers for education in the National Conference of State Legislators. And I'm just really glad that Jenna agreed to do this today. She's been a partner for us at the Center on Network Science for many years, from times when we convinced her to participate in studies using the partner tool to being a trainer at our Network Leadership Training Academy. And over the years that we've known Jenna, we have never failed to learn from her, and she's brought enormous experience and really great kinds of tips and helpful ways to address the kinds of things that people who are doing the same kind of work that she's doing, bringing that to them as a resource. And so typically we would just start on our webinar, but because Jenna is going to talk about something that's particularly challenging in a particular kind of network that she is involved in now, I was hoping that I could ask a couple of questions of Jenna so we could hear a little bit more about her background and experience before she actually starts her session. So Jenna, welcome today. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks so much.
So before we get started, I was hoping that you could kind of give a little bit of background to set the stage about your past experiences and how the networks that you've been a part of have kind of evolved, and kind of what more typical challenges were that you faced, because I think it will set the stage a little bit on why the setting that you're in now is a little bit different. And for someone who's really experienced like you in running and leading and managing networks, how today is something unique and different that you'll talk about. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your experiences in leading networks.
Sure.
Great.
So thank you, Danielle and Melinda, for hosting me today. I was actually one of the first guinea pigs for your tool, and I still dream of the partner network map that you brought to Denver. It was really cool, and I still to this day totally geek out on it. So I love it. So none of us actually grow up saying we're going to be network leaders. As kids, I think a lot of us just really kind of fall, stumble, trip, open a door, and we're suddenly a network leader. So when I was working for Governor Romer during the welfare reform, we created, we had a lot more women going into the workplace. And in Colorado, so a shout out to all my Colorado friends who are on the call. In Colorado, we have something called devolution. And devolution essentially means that there is a lot of local control happening in the state. So as we were thinking through how to support more women going into the workforce, we realized that the quality of childcare in our state was really, really bad. And we were trying to figure out how we could solve this. So what we did was we created early childhood councils. 31 early childhood councils. We started off with about 12 and then 17, and then we kept growing them over the years. But what we did was we decided that we wanted local communities to really come together to figure out what were the issues in their local communities. So what early childhood issues look like in Durango, and Canyon City, and Denver, and Fort Collins. We have some of the same issues, and we have some different issues. Not enough people providing childcare, different kinds of families, rural issues, urban issues, financing issues. So we decided to give this to local communities. And with just a few droplets of funding, we brought people together. So then I ended up at Colorado Department of Education leading all the early childhood councils. And we started to see that these councils were having some challenges because they didn't have any coordination, any staffing, people just kind of coming together around the ideas of early childhood that they needed a little bit more to catalyze their work into action. So we began to put out more money to hire staff for the council to kind of run the collaborative. And we realized that everyone had all these common connections and threads. So we started a statewide network of early childhood councils. And the great thing is that has actually now become its own nonprofit and its own leadership alliance of all the councils. So a couple, some common themes and challenges I think that I've seen over the years is, when you have this really organic grassroots network, and then you put staff, you give the network staff. And then what happens when there's staffing and how people kind of relinquish ownership of the network, or they actually begin to try to over-control the network, and how the directors of these early childhood councils had this really challenging experience of bringing together not just people who really love kids, but people from their local human service agency, public schools, child find, you had special education, you had parents, you had just on-the-ground childcare providers who are taking care of kids every day. So I think one of the big lessons learned in the beginning was that if you're going to have staff lead a collaborative, they need to have the training and skills to truly be facilitators for change. And so that is something that I think we learned early on and continue to learn, that the facilitation skills of a network leader are as important, if not more important, than just the skill to be able to just bring people together around, a topic that we all love, young kids, right? So this is a great topic to bring people together.
Awesome. Wow, that is such good advice. When we ask people what their number one challenge is, they almost always say facilitation. So it makes sense, yeah. Okay, before we get started on this, we have a couple of polls. We actually just wanted to get a sense of folks who are attending the call today and what they're facing as challenges. But the first question we have that's going to go up right now is, so if you are out there right now, go ahead and answer these two questions. You should just be able to click on your screen. The first one asks, compared to other work that you do, how difficult do you find leading and managing your network to be? So this is making an assumption that you are actually leading a network, but we're assuming since you're on this call that you might have some relationship to that. So go ahead and answer that question. And then the second one, what is your greatest challenge in leading and managing a network? And while we know there are many more than this short list, we tried to put in some of the things that we've heard people say are some of the greatest challenges in managing and leading a network. So we thought this would just give a little bit of context. So we will post these results in just a moment here. And so if you haven't done it, just go ahead and click on. Okay. All right. So lots of good answers here. All right. So great. So you all should be able to see the results. So we see that actually folks say that how challenging is leading a network is only a fair amount more difficult. So and only a few saying a great deal more difficult. So this is kind of out of context, right? Like, we don't know what else other people are challenged with. But one reason that we thought this was an interesting question was because when we were talking with Jenna about getting this webinar together, one of the things that we heard her say was that there are a lot of particular challenges that are coming up in the work she's doing now that she hadn't really faced before. And so where she was comfortable as a network leader, now it's taking her a little bit more out of the box and bringing up new ways to think about things. So what is your greatest challenge? Getting buy-in and commitment from partner or colleagues was the number one answer here. So great, thanks for doing that. It looks like everything else is kind of spread out a little bit. All right, so that's helpful for us. We kind of wanted to know where people kind of sat and the ways they were thinking. So without any more kind of background here, we're going to go ahead and start now. Let Jenna take time to go through and introduce the network that she is working with, and how this is one that she's really trying to work with on building resiliency in this kind of network leadership framework. So Jenna, if you are ready.
Terrific. Okay, thank you, Danielle. Okay, so let me just, before I kind of go into the current network work that I am doing, I just want to hit a kind of a refresh button on what is a network. I think about this a lot, and every time I hang out with Danielle, I say, okay, tell me again what a network is in your mind. The last time we were eating a bagel and you said it's really kind of a semblance of bringing people together, right? Mm-hmm. So when it's more than one person in the room, suddenly you have this network that's created, like, you know, this bringing people together. So the book that I've read probably 4 different times, Networks That Work. 2007, I was just looking at it the other night thinking, I wonder how different if they were to write it again in 2017. But they define a network that refers to any sustained effort around which different autonomous organizations work in concert as equal partners in pursuit of a common social or civic purpose. So I love that definition. So I'm going to show you, here's my vision of what a network is. So a couple weeks ago, I took my 8-year-old son to an antique mall to look for an antique piano bench to go up to next to our piano. And so it's an antique mall of collectors, right? And so every little collector has a booth. So my son, who's 8, is obsessed with fidget spinners. So for those of you who have young kids, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't, you probably heard about this fad that's happening around kids. So this was originally a tool that was created to help children with autism keep their focus. It spins, right? So my little guy probably has about 10 of these that we've gotten from all over the place. So we're walking around this antique mall, and he comes across this booth that has nothing but fidget spinners. There was probably like 75 in the booth. So he starts to just flip out. And we have to get someone to come and open it up. And he pulls out one, and he says, this is the one I want. I don't know if you can tell in the picture, but it's $54.55. Right? This is the fidget spinner, this of all fidget spinners. Like, this is like the king. And obviously, I did not buy it. And you probably can guess that a meltdown ensued after that. But I took a picture of it for him just to say, let's always hold this in your mind as, like, you know, the great fidget spinner. And I just really think this image is cool of different organizations trying to come together in partnership, right, in tandem. And if only networks looked this seamless. But let's talk about the seamlessness, the science of networks. So this is what I've always kind of held in my mind to be true, right? So why do we have networks? Networks are about leveraging trust and relationship among, you know, different partners. It's extending those limited resources, and really with the intent to boost on-the-ground work, activities, and results. We also do it because we really do want multiple perspectives on a social problem instead of just trying to figure it out just by ourselves as one organization. I think time and time again, we have found that when you bring multiple people together to figure something out, we do a much better job together than doing it on our own. So we've had kind of this, this way that we have framed networks, right? We've got our cooperating networks, where we do information sharing, right? Where we get together. I was just in one of these cooperative networks just last week, and it was so interesting because to my right, I had a Latino police officer, and to my left, I had a Vietnamese priest. And we were this cooperating network, just sharing. And I kept thinking, I so want to be in a collaborative network with these two guys. But it was just, it was a just kind of a connecting, getting to know you network. So then a lot of us spend time in these coordinating networks, right? Where we take a step up from cooperating, and we have, you know, we identify priorities. Everyone kind of says, okay, I'm going to commit around this issue. We're going to develop activities, right? So a lot of our early childhood councils, we were kind of started at cooperating, we're doing this coordinating work. And then there's the really complex, challenging work of collaborative networks, right? So where you've come together for systemic reform and you have created a structure where you can deal with conflict because conflict is going to happen, right? And where everyone is willing to think differently about the resources that they have. They're willing to shift the way they operate and kind of reformulate the system. We have an example of that at the state in Colorado. It took us many, many years, but we created within our State Department of Human Services an Office of Early Childhood. And so a lot of state agencies had to give up a lot in order to kind of create this collaborative entity that is kind of a hub for us around early childhood in the state. So that took a really high-level collaborative coalition of people to make that happen. So, you know, within this science, sorry about that. Not pulling up on mine that way. So within the science of all of this, sorry about the strange slide, but let me just kind of walk you through this. There are kind of rules about all of this, right? So the rules of networks, a couple of things that even in networks that work, they talk about you really want to tackle issues early and head on. You know, some of those cross-sector challenges that have already kind of existed historically. Members need to be treating each other as equal partners. We have to acknowledge that this process takes time. It doesn't happen. You can't do some of this big stuff in a one-year grant that many of us have. You have to make sure that participants have the approval and authority from the organizations and agencies they represent to sit on your network. You need to have written protocols and sign network agreements on how you're going to govern and work together, and that network management, membership roles and responsibilities are made clear. You know, we all know that the SMART acronym and how these activities must be SMART. So, you know, that measurable, that results-driven, timelines, and then that you really need to have some funding in place and that resources are pursued to support the network. And ta-da, I always think you have network success when you get a logo. All right, so moving on. So then it kind of looks like this. This is our kind of traditional thinking about what networks look like. Kind of, I think that they're linear, right? And then you have these nodes, and people live at the center of those nodes. So you're bringing people together around topics. All right, so I've set up kind of the science, the linear lens that I've been working within to do network leadership. So I'm going to tell you the story of Launch Together in Southwest Denver. So for many years, both in Colorado and really in all of your states, we have been having a crisis that young children, infants, toddlers, and preschoolers are getting suspended and expelled from preschool and from their child care programs. I know everyone is nodding their head. Just think about that. Suspension and expulsion of infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So we have very little data to back this up, but we have heard story upon story upon story. What the data does tell us is that it's an incredibly high number of children with developmental delays. It's an incredibly high number of boys, and it's an incredibly high number of boys of color. So this is a complex issue. So we have also heard, as an early childhood council, we have almost 500 licensed child care programs in the city and county of Denver alone. And the #1 training request we get is around how to work with children with challenging behaviors. We have our babies and our preschoolers are incredibly stressed out and experiencing trauma. So for many years, we really, collaborative networks kept knocking on the door of funders saying we need some more funding around early childhood mental health issues. So about a year and a half ago, 8 foundations came together as a collaborative and put funding for 4 different grantees across the state to really dive into the issue of early childhood mental health systems building for 4 years. So over the course of 4 years, we will be getting $2 million, and we have some very key requirements of this grant. I won't go into the key requirements of the grant, aside from the fact that we have to really bring partners together. We have required partners of public health, mental health, and the Early Childhood Council. So we have 3 core partners, and then we have to really expand that and open that up. So over the past year and a half, we went through a really intensive collaborative planning process and received the grant, which was terrific. So it's great to have a collaboration where you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you have kind of a goal where you're gonna like, okay, hopefully we'll get this money, we're gonna write this grant, here's kind of our thinking. So in our collaborative process, we chose a neighborhood in Southwest Denver. So if we got the grant, this is where we were gonna focus. So we did get the grant, and we were focused in Southwest Denver. So I've highlighted this. So in Denver, we're very, very neighborhood focused, right? So that devolution even comes down to, I think maybe, I want to say 76 neighborhoods. And so we decided to really focus our efforts over the next 4 years in Southwest Denver. And we used data to really get us to these neighborhoods. And this is the data point that really stands out for us, the low number of 3- and 4-year-olds enrolled in preschool. Families are simply not accessing preschool at a higher rate than other neighborhoods. And when we actually have almost 60 childcare programs in these neighborhoods. Now, this is a slightly older piece of data, so those numbers have actually gone up, but they're still very low in accessing early childhood supports. We also see in these neighborhoods that they have the highest number of referrals into child welfare, highest rates of teen pregnancy, highest rates of domestic violence, highest rates of violence, highest rates of low-performing schools, low-quality childcare, right? So you can just the data over and over again. I could show you 20 slides, and you would start to see the same pattern for this neighborhood. So at the same time, as we got this grant, at the same time, we began to spend a lot more time in Southwest Denver. Really getting to know the community. And I think probably the biggest thing we learned about Southwest Denver is while they're an incredibly vulnerable community, they're also an incredibly resilient community. The high population of Latino families. We have a very thriving Vietnamese community tucked in there as well. And we have many, many, many kids. So through our network, we decided to really kind of embed the language of the network in our mission. So our mission is to build a resilient, trauma-informed community network of parents, providers, and programs throughout Southwest Denver who are responsive to the social and emotional needs of young children, their families, and the champions who serve them. But we realized that we really cannot tackle the issue of preschool suspension and expulsion without looking at the deeper issues on why this is happening. We know that many of these children and families have had adverse childhood experiences. They have trauma, they have chronic stress, and it's manifesting itself in childcare programs, in schools. It's really manifesting itself in the playgrounds, the neighborhoods. When you drive around, Southwest Denver looks very different than some of our other communities in Denver. So within that network, we embedded 3 goals. We really want to tackle the issue of systems and services that they're more responsive to families. We really wanted to tackle the issue of reflection, that this is really a core element of doing work around trauma, and that to really go in thinking about how resilient families already are and what we can do with them to support them in the neighborhoods to even build on that resilience. So this is where things get kind of sticky. We decide to really go deeper into the issues of trauma, and trauma and resilience. So I pulled up kind of the definition. I love how succinct and simple it is. Trauma, a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So we often say when we're training on trauma now that you know that you've had trauma when your life is kind of just going down a certain path, and a traumatic event, either a car accident, an act of violence, a divorce. These things completely take you off your path, and that you never quite get back on that path again. You're changed because of it. So we really want to kind of get into what that is in this work. But we also want to balance it with this idea of resilience. So Danielle, do you have kind of like, when you guys think of resilience, what words come to mind for resilience?
Strength.
Strength.
Sustainability.
Right. The ability to kind of bounce, right?
Yeah.
To kind of recover quickly. This idea that we're tough, we're gritty.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids. I've heard time and time again. Oh, our kids are so resilient. They're going to be okay.
Mm.
So getting back to this idea that we built our mission, we built this idea of a trauma-informed community network into our mission. So the language of trauma-informed care is a word that we have brought from the mental health and juvenile justice world. It's really new to the early childhood world, and my guess is it's probably new to the world of networks. Sure. So let me just give you a couple definitions that I like. So a trauma-informed approach is defined as a program, organization, or system that really kind of sees the widespread impact of trauma on everyone and understands how people can recover. It recognizes the signs of symptoms and trauma, of trauma in clients, families, and staff. For example, I was just watching, like between the hurricanes and the fires and the shootings that happened over the past couple months, you can see it when they're interviewing people who've been through it. They kind of have this look of almost like disconnect in their face, right? Yeah. You can see it. But then it takes, being trauma-informed goes another step, and it's about how are you responsive when you see it? Okay, we have this inclination almost to kind of pull back from it, right? Because it's pretty intense. But really, being trauma-informed is you step toward it, and that you begin to really use it to contextualize all of your work. The second definition, trauma-informed care, involves not only changing assumptions about how we organize and provide services, but also creating organizational cultures that are personal, creative, open, and healing. I want you to hold on to those last 4 words. Those are really important words to me. So let me tell you about our community network. So instead of putting a bunch of words up on it, I want you to give you the picture of Rosa. So as I was going into this work in Southwest Denver, I kind of thought, oh, here I'm going to follow the rules. We're going to create this community network. We're going to have kind of this come one, come all. Let's talk about mental health in young children. Open the doors. We have our first training around trauma because we wanted to kind of, introduce the idea of it. I have it in Spanish and in English, but I have good food. I opened the door. So I'm thinking I'm going to get all these community members to join this conversation. And we have 130 people show up to this training around trauma, but no one is from the community. So I'm like, what's going on? So the great thing is that I have connected with this wonderful woman named Rosa, who is what we call a promotora. So she is a woman in Southwest Denver who has been working there for years and years and years. She knows people. She's gone to their quinceaneras. She helps them when there's a domestic violence charge. She helps them when they go to a well child visit. She explains what to do when a school closes, right? She is the internet for Southwest Denver. She is Rosa. Yeah. And I'm just fortunate enough to have met her. So I said, Rosa, what happened? Like, where are our community members? Where are the women? And she said to me, Jenna, they knew that you had all these agencies who are going to be in the training, and they didn't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable coming to this conversation. And I said, what do we do? So what we did was we went to them. And this is where I kind of go into the next slide, what I call Rosa's rules, right? So we take our linear rules and then we put in Rosa's rules. So some things that I have learned from Rosa. Really that trust is the center of this work, right? And then you layer into it that the fact that we are working in a community where there is trauma. We're working in a community where when we wrote this grant 2 Octobers ago, we had a different president. And so now we have a community where there is a great deal of heightened fear. The majority of the women that we thought were going to be coming to the training are undocumented. We did it in a space that they weren't familiar with, right? So I talk about, Rosa often talks about location. We have to meet in places where they're familiar with. There's a wonderful urban gardening organization called Revision. They have kind of a warehouse-like space, and we go there. It's cold, we bring our blankets, but Rosa always brings great food that she has made, but they don't have to take a bus. They can walk there. She reminds me all the time that while my thinking is that we want to bring people in, we want to connect people to systems, right? Because that's where all the resources are. But in fact, they don't want to connect to our systems. In fact, they actually may need to stay out of our systems, right? And so that we as a network, we as this collaborative need to rethink how people are connecting to services. And that the services that exist, they don't necessarily trust. And they don't actually know what services exist because they don't often have internet, computers, emails. So the way they get information is through word of mouth. And then through word of mouth, we've got this language barrier, right? I don't speak Spanish very, very well. And oftentimes the promotoras, all these women who are just like these Rosas all over Southwest Denver, they're not comfortable speaking English, right? So we do a lot of smiling and a lot of laughing, and we eat, and there's a lot of hugging, but the language is a challenge. And then on top of that, we have the stigma of mental health. So Rosa would say to me, Jenna, you know, these women are worried that you're here telling us that our kids are crazy, right? Kind of this traditional model of mental health equated with craziness, loco. But what we're trying to talk about, and what Rosa and now the community promotoras, all of her connections are talking about, is this is really about well-being. She does not use the word mental health. We were just talking about what does the mental health system look like in Mexico, and she looked at me and she said, what do you mean by a mental health system? She said the wealthy Mexicanos, they would maybe go to a therapist, but that's not even on our radar. Like maybe a counselor in school would help our families, but not really, right? So their paradigm of mental health is completely different, but they still have the same stigmas, right? That there's something very, very scary about this mental health work. I mean, that is pervasive across all cultures. So let's go back to, so then we're now kind of, trying to build this network using Rosa's rules paired with when the rules don't fit. All right, so again, we have, sorry about this slide being funky, but when you walk through it, it's the idea, right? So kind of the rules that we were starting with, the rules that as I begin to build this network, I was using kind of this traditional paradigm. But here are the challenges that I am met with. This idea of tackling issues head on. But what about when you have partners, both community partners, professional partners, we're actually bringing trauma to the table, right? We're bringing vulnerability to the table. We're bringing people's personal histories to the table. This idea, this rule, right? This paradigm that we have to treat each other as equal partners. When actually we have this incredible power imbalance. And to bring a community promotora to a table with someone who is a leader within Denver's child welfare system, Just think about that. I mean, we are living in an unequal system. And so to assume equality of power is actually a wrong assumption. This idea that the process may take some time. The clock has already been ticking on our grant. We're 1 year into it. And we're building this network, finding out that, oh yeah, we can't use what we thought kind of this traditional way of looking at things. And we have 3 years left. For a lot of us, it sounds like a lot of time. For me, I'm already panicking about how we're going to do this in 3 years, right? Authority from your organization. So what about when our participants don't have authority? And when they don't trust our agencies and our organizations, and we're asking them to come to the table with those partners who can many times have penalized them or put them at risk, right? And what about this idea, right? We have these written protocols and network agreements. I've realized now that we have partners who not only don't speak English, but they cannot read in Spanish. So when I hand them an evaluation in Spanish, I think, check, I've done that. I had it translated, right? It doesn't work. And so Rosa often walks around and helps people read the evaluation form, or kind of if I put the agenda in Spanish, they may not be able to read it. And then think about when you're building your network, how much time, how many emails you're sending out to everybody, right? A lot of these women, a lot of the promotoras, they don't have internet. The internet is really crummy in their neighborhood. They can't afford it. They don't have a computer, email. So these women are connecting by through an app called the WhatsApp app. So that's how they send all their information. It's texting, because they do all have phones. And that is really, really essential. And then this idea of, these really linear, solid activities. So what do we do when the real work that has to be done is slowed by so much processing? And then just some of these really nitty-gritty things, like I really want to fund the promotoras to go out and share messages around early childhood well-being and mental health. I really want to pay them for their time to sit at our table and be part of our network. But these women are undocumented, and so they don't have a social security number. And so for me to try to develop a contract with them and give them funding, I don't know exactly how to do that in a way that is quote unquote legal. So where do we go from here? And really kind of where do I go from here? So this is where I want to just kind of step back and be reflective, because Danielle, this is where you really wanted to kind of get the underbelly of all this, and kind of my initial thinking now as we're really just beginning this work. And maybe I can come back in 3 years and kind of tell you how it went.
We'll take you every year.
Right. So here's some of the things that I'm really thinking about right now, that I'm realizing that I need to let go of the network paradigm that I've been using. And that I'm finding myself paying greater attention to building relationships with the women and the men in the community, with the promotoras. And that these are not relationships like formal working relationships. They're more informal, right? So like one of the women invited me to her daughter's quinceanera. We eat together, we laugh together. I mean, it really is, in a way, it's more of a friendship than a kind of a professional working relationship. I think that this idea that as when I wrote the mission around resilience and trauma, I think I was not taking seriously the language of trauma, that we are really talking about mental health work that is very deeply personal and vulnerable work. If you've ever taken an ACEs screen to see what your score is, it's really like, how much have I been traumatized? That's really, really heavy stuff. And we all have a story of trauma. I'm thinking more about this idea of reflective leadership, right? That has a lot of humility to it, and that where I can be really nimble, really just kind of responsive to really what it feels so much more informal. Timelines, deadlines, activities, inputs, outputs. This is not language that they are familiar with, nor are they interested in. They just want to get in and do the work, which makes a lot of sense to me. And then I've been really acutely aware of where I'm coming from as a white woman who does not live in Southwest Denver. And to, again, go back to that humility and just being really aware of my own implicit bias about working with women who have come from all over Latin America to sit at our tables. And then, we're also really beginning to think about this idea of language justice. So we just had this amazing community dialogue on resilience. And we kind of did the come one, come all to all of our professional colleagues and to all of our community colleagues, a big community conversation, entire day, talking about resilience. We had 80 people show up, and 70 of them were from the community.
Oh.
But we didn't have many show up from the systems and the services. And I think it's because we did the training in Spanish. And those of us who speak English had headsets. And actually, we all wore headsets all day. But the training was in Spanish. I kind of intentionally did all the PowerPoints, all the documents. I didn't have them translated, just to have the experience of what it's like to go into a presentation where you don't understand a darn word on a piece of paper. That's what it was like. So we had 70 people from the neighborhood and sitting and having a dialogue, sitting at a table where not everyone speaks the same language, yet we're really talking about pretty deep stuff. And how do you really practice that language justice in a really thoughtful way? I also am really trying to be intentional about levity and lightness. This is heavy stuff that really can, there are times where I go home at the end of the day and I feel really daunted hearing the stories about a kiddo being exited from a program and that no other program will take this 4-year-old because he's stuck in the foster care system and having meltdowns day after day after day. So we have to have some levity. And then one thing I did leave out, a key bullet point, is really two things. Food, really good food, and childcare. Mm-hmm. This is what, when we have this, then we have translation, we're finding that more and more people, we're doing it in spaces that are comfortable, more and more people will come. And that ultimately network leadership for me now is about implementing the science, but also really thinking about the art, right? It's kind of the converging the linear with the non-linear. And I think that this is really where the resilience lives. I think the resilience lives in the beauty of it and in the art of it. So I'm going to just kind of leave us and get our left brains kind of going a bit. And I'm even going to put on a little bit of music. All right. Okay. So imagine a network where the words personal, open, creative, and healing are part of our network rules. Personal, open, creative, and healing. This is what it could look like. So thank you.
Jenna, that was awesome. What a way to end our webinar. I don't know that anyone has ever almost brought me to tears at the end of a webinar. That was just so sweet. We want to, Jenna, thank you so much. That was just such a really important lesson that you've just taught all of us. We want to open it up for questions, and we only have a few minutes here. So if you do have a question for Jenna, make sure that you put it into the Q&A box and not the chat box. So go ahead and do that now if anyone does have one. While we might wait for some of those, while that's getting queued up, if anyone has questions, I wanted to also be sure, well, let's go ahead and start them. So one person asked, Jenna, has your group done any systems mapping to identify leverage points in the system that you work in?
You know, I love that question. I love systems mapping. So when we applied for the grant, we had to do an environmental scan, to kind of get a sense of who is doing what in early childhood in Southwest Denver. And so we're now at the place after a year of doing the work where we're realizing that we need to do some deeper mapping, because we're still not fully clear on like where is the mental health work happening, and then all that complementary work, right? So we really only kind of mapped the early childhood and home visitation and pediatric system, but we left out, like, you know, the Vietnamese priest, Father Joseph, to my left. We left his piece out. The Latino cop to my right, we left him out of the systems map. And so now we got to rethink about going back in and mapping what it is that they're doing, and how, and like, you know, like the question says, how do we think about those leverage points differently?
Mm-hmm. So someone did say you were so inspiring, so thank you. Is the environmental scan tool available to share? Folks would love to see that tool for a project that they're working on.
You know, I think it was really just a set of survey questions. And I'm happy to dig up the questions that we asked. And then kind of like with the partner tool, you know, we just sent it out to everyone I could think of. And it was a pretty hefty survey. So I think I gave them a movie card as a thank you, which is another important thing I've learned in network building. And that so I'm happy to dig that up and share it with you, Jen.
Great. And when we do a follow-up email, we can send those kinds of resources as well. Someone's asking to see the last slide about networks. I'm not sure.
Go up to,
let me see, which one?
The slide 16. That one, maybe.
Is it this one? Or, let's see if we can find it. I don't know. I'm not sure which one that is. So we're going to go ahead and send the.
I think it's a match network.
I think we're going to go ahead and. We will send the slides out, and when we send the slides out, they won't have any of the weird formatting on them, of course. Oh, good, we got the right one. And you'll have access to all of these with Jenna's permission, of course. So another question, you mentioned that in the first meeting that you had, there were a lot of agencies and no community. And then in the last meeting, you described a lot of community and not many agencies. How have the agencies been reacting to this complexity that you've surfaced? And are they willing to engage? How are they engaging back? And what's been the response from the agencies?
You know, I think that we're just now figuring it out. I mean, we're now seeing it, right? We haven't had, it's hard to have perspective when you're standing in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But it was in September that we had the resilience training. And so I think we're now, I think some of the organizations and some of the agencies that are working in Southwest Denver are really open to how do we tell them about our resources? You know, who do we send? Where can we go? Who do we talk to? But you know, the promotoras they're an informal network, right? It's not like they meet every, you know, the third Thursday of every month at 9 o'clock, right? They're a lot more informal. And so it's kind of figuring out, again, going back to Rosa, like Rosa, when are you going to be pulling them together? we are doing, as part of our grant, we are doing a program, a parent leadership program called Abriendo Puertas, which translates to opening doors. And it is a parent program developed by and for Latino parents. So it's all in Spanish. And it's happening it's a 10-week program. And so we're seeing that a lot of parents and promotoras are coming to that, right? So it's opportunities when we bring them together we need to put our folks who are providing services in the same room with them. I mean, so much of it is like this trusted relationship, right? If you've ever gone to a therapist or sent your children to a therapist, it's not the same as, like getting, like someone to come fix your house. Although actually it's kind of the same thing. It's like word of mouth, right? Do you have a good mechanic? Do you have a good handyman, right? Do you know, so who's doing the deeper counseling work in the community? It is really kind of how it goes back to the trust. Yeah. And so putting people in front of each other instead of relying on the internet to communicate your resources.
Right. So just time for a couple more questions. So let's get these last few. Could you shortly muse on how to translate these insights to a global scale to actually connect networks and social movements that already exist? How do you save the world, Jenna?
Well, you are the PhD. Can you answer that one?
I've learned so much from you today. I know something that folks ask me all the time is if they're not already involved in a network, like how do you just get started? And we've had inquiries from like the private sector of folks who say, how do you get these community networks started? And it's a hard thing to answer when you've been in the nonprofit and public sector for so long, where that network way of working has become a way. So we are probably surrounded by a lot of people who are already connected to other networks. And so the big question here, like another question I had was, how do you even get it started? If you don't have a grant and you just have a heart for it or a real conviction. So,
well, I've traveled many years ago. I bought a one-way ticket around the world, and I do think that this probably impacted my work. But I think I'm also my background is cultural anthropology, and I would say that around the world, everywhere I have been, there is a Rosa, right? There is a woman, a parent, an abuela, a grandmother, who is the trusted person. And I found Rosa through a friend who had heard from someone else that, oh, you need to talk to Rosa. Just kind of like as we're trying to figure out how to connect with the Vietnamese community, everyone has said to me, you've got to talk to Father Joseph. When he was sitting to my left at this cooperative network last week, I was like, it's Father Joseph, right? So I think, from Thailand to India to Europe to the Middle East to Latin America, there always are those people. They're what we had. It's my grandma Rosie. It was, the woman that people came to her kitchen table to sit and drink coffee and talk about the real stuff. And so we as network leaders need to be humble and respectful and ask, who is she? Who is he? And then go to their doorstep and knock on their door. My grandma Rosie always believed that it was the porch swing, having a front porch and having a good stoop to sit on or to swing on, that people will come to your porch. Just put it out there. So I think on a global level, that could be one way to go at it.
Yeah, I love that lesson. Something we've learned at our center is when we work with communities to always treat the community members as experts. No matter what we're bringing, we need their context and their expertise in order to make sense of what's happening.
And I actually just a couple days ago said to Rosa, I said, Rosa, you tell me, you're the expert.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she was like, what? And I go, you are the expert. And I could see her kind of like thinking about that. And I said, Rosa, they say that if you've done something for 10,000 hours, you are an expert. I said, that is what the research says. And she looked at me, and then you could just see her calculating in her mind. And then she smiled at me, and she put her hand on my shoulder. She said, I am an expert.
Oh, so good. So we're going to end with that on that very good note. And just thank you, everyone who joined our call today. We hope that it was as meaningful for you all as we feel like it was here. And thank you, Jenna, so much for taking your time today and sharing these lessons with us. I learned something every single time we talk, so I'm really grateful for you today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. My email's on the front of the slide. So please pop me an email if you have more questions or just want more information. But thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.